on this. We had to sculpt 26 components in wax, then we would sprue it or attach like a wax rod to those wax patterns and put a can over the outside or the flask and pour liquid investment over the top of the wax model, and then in turn allow that to dry, put that into the burnout oven and heat it up to the point that the wax melted out of there and cured the investment. They used to do this in ancient times using beeswax to make the mold and clay to make the investment, and then they would melt the beeswax out of their mold and pour molten bronze or gold or silver into it. We'd melt the bronze in a crucible inside of the melting furnace and pour the molten bronze into the flask while a vacuum was pulling from underneath to give a nice dense casting. At the point we got everything cast and pulled out of the investment, there was a lot of cleanup. I had Alicia work on chasing or carving in the details and polishing up everything and soldering the separate components together. So she was
the wax skull for the Dante's Rebellion sword.
So I have this pre-existing skull, and we're going to alter it to make it more demon-like. I'm going to rework his teeth, make sure they're strong, because it being an old wax, the wax is a little brittle, so it needs to be reinforced. I'm going to have to reconstruct the top of his head with this sheet wax. Then I'm going to start working on the bone arms, and then the rib cage we're going to open up so we see the Damascus steel blade come through. And I'm going to make the crown part. The original piece was a solid piece, and we're making it into 3 pieces. So it's pretty much a good day's work here.
To save Lauren a lot of sculpting time, I removed some material from the wax bones using a sander.
Lauren uses multiple flasks to invest the sections for the Devil May Cry sword. For the skull on this sword, we use a 5-inch diameter flask. It has about 8 pounds of investment in it.
The investment is a plaster mix with some other stuff mixed in to make it hard, and it gets cooked in a kiln afterwards, and what it becomes is our mold for pouring the molten metal in.
Once it falls to 900 degrees, I take the flask out to the water and quench it to reveal the skull.
Yay, we have teeth! Yeah. We have teeth!
We follow the same procedure 2 more times to cast the rib cage and the bones.
Now that we have all of our hilt parts cast,
In a gas foundry, we bring the bronze up to 2100 degrees. In the electric kiln, we have the flasks between 950 and 1000. We pull out the flask, set it in the vacuum unit, and pour the bronze. Now that the bronze temperature has fallen below 900 degrees, we quench the flask in water and shows that the casting is perfect.
Just from a goodwill. We're preheating it on top of the forge. It's cracking a little bit, but we're gonna slump it in on itself rather than just smash it. We'll have a little bit less air trapped when we do the slump into the mold itself. So it's already starting to slump a little bit. I'm just pushing it in on itself to get a little bit of safety for us. All right, let's rotate just a little. The thing to remember about glass is it's a fluid. It's always a fluid. It just depends on how much heat you give it as to how quickly it'll move. It's fine. It's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. It's just going to make it easier for us when we go to the kiln. We're just going to melt it into a little bit more of a clump. Oh, that's so cool.
Lauren provided me with a large egg shape. It's not quite the form that I want to be able to mount the glass. I'm just going to go ahead and take it right to the sander. Before going to the kiln, we'll often go to a small oven, and that will allow us to de-wax the unit so that we don't have to burn all of the wax out inside of the kiln. After the flask has come back down closer to room temperature, I load the glass in the top. This will have to slump down inside. We'll move the flasks into the kiln where they'll go up to 1350 degrees Fahrenheit. After almost 2 days in the kiln, we can remove the flask and show the glass.
Hilt out of wax, made an RTV silicone rubber mold, and then poured a urethane pattern into the mold so we have a positive pattern to use into the sand casting. Brought my friend Jay from Dark Print Studios down in San Diego to do the sand casting. The master's sword hilt is too large for me to be able to do with the investment casting, so I need to use sand casting process. In sand casting, as opposed to lost wax investment casting, what we're doing is we're making the cavity for the molten bronze to pour into by using a positive pattern that we make out of resin and press into the sand. The sand is a special kind of sand for foundry work for sand casting called Petrobond. Pretty much everything we do can kill you, but sand casting, if you don't have everything totally dry, you have one speck of water in there, it'll vaporize inside the piece and blow up. Once we have that shape inside the flask and we pour the molten bronze in there, it'll take on the shape of the plastic piece. Meanwhile, Jay's outside with the melting furnace, bringing up the bronze to the 1800 degrees melting point and pouring it into the sand mold. So the moment of truth is when he pours the molten bronze into the mold. We'll see if it explodes or not. It didn't explode. He's let it cool down a bit. We've broken open the mold and it came out great. So Lego type blocks to build a custom mold frame and then use room temperature rubber molding compound. I use the Duplo blocks because I can build a mold frame of whatever shape I want and it goes together relatively quickly. So we made one mold and we cast the 7 pieces, sprue those or attach those to like a wax tree, and then I'll be pouring investment, which is like plaster of Paris, over the top. When I melt the wax out of there, it'll leave a cavity and I'll be able to pour molten bronze into that cavity and it'll take on the shape of the original one that I made. Burns out the wax, leaving a cavity. I heat up molten bronze. Imagine a river of molten magma pouring over the top of this mold, and that's what it is right now. Investment casting, as I call it, is also known as lost wax casting because when I do the wax model, the investment actually disappears when I'm finished with it. The mold actually breaks apart. It's only a one-time use.